The old man didn't say a word when he walked in. He just set the wooden case on the counter, unlatched it and stepped back, like he was presenting evidence, like he already knew what the verdict was going to be and was giving the younger man a chance to prove him wrong. Inside the case, nestled in faded green felt, was a pocket watch. Not a wristwatch, a genuine railroad pocket watch, the kind that used to ride in vest pockets and keep whole train lines on schedule. Gold-filled case worn smooth on the edges. A chain that had been repaired at least twice, with links that didn't quite match. The face was cream-coloured with Roman numerals, and even from across the counter you could see the crack running along the crystal like a dry riverbed. Nate Holloway looked at it the way a doctor looks at an X-ray before delivering bad news. He was 34 years old, certified by the American Watchmakers Clockmakers Institute, trained in Geneva for 8 months on a fellowship he still talked about at dinner parties. His shop, Holloway Precision, sat on the corner of Dunmore Street in a brick building that had been a pharmacy in the 1940s. He'd renovated it himself. Clean lines, track lighting, a glass display case full of Rolexes and Omegas waiting for service. He picked up the watch with 2 fingers, turned it over, pressed the crown. Nothing moved. "This is a Waltham," he said. 1918, the old man said. "Model 1908, 17 jewels." Nate set it back down and pulled a loop from his breast pocket. He looked at it for a long moment, then set the loop on the counter. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "The mainspring is gone. I can see that just from the weight. But the bigger problem is the escapement. The pallet fork, you can't even get the parts for these anymore, not new ones. And fitting a replacement from a donor watch on something this old, with this kind of wear pattern." He shook his head slowly, the way people do when they want to seem reluctant about saying something they've already decided. "It's more work than the watch is worth, financially speaking." The old man looked at Nate for a moment. His eyes were pale blue, the kind of blue that fades with age but doesn't lose its clarity. "What's your name, son?" "Nate Holloway, Holloway." The old man nodded like he was filing that away. "I'm Silas Bertram Odum." He said it the way men of a certain generation say their full names. All 3, no shortcuts, as if the whole name was the unit of identity and cutting it short would be disrespectful to whoever gave it to them. "Mr. Odum," Nate said, "I'm sorry I can't give you better news. If it's sentimental value, I understand. But the labour alone would be, mind if I take a look myself?" Nate blinked. "Sir?" At the movement. "Do you have a case knife?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone says something unexpected in a space that has a rhythm to it, and the rhythm skips. Yes, Nate said, "but I don't think you'll want to. I'm not going to hurt it any worse than it already is." Silas Bertram Odum said this, without sharpness, without impatience. Just a statement of fact from a man who had made many statements of fact over many decades and had learned that the most important ones sounded like the calmest ones. Nate handed him the case knife. He watched the old man take it. Watched his hands. They were remarkable hands, if you knew what to look for. The knuckles were enlarged from years of work in cold conditions. The index finger on his right hand had a scar that ran from the first knuckle to the base of the nail. Not a clean cut. Something older. Something that had healed without much medical attention. But the fingers moved with precision. The case knife went to the back of the watch, found the groove on the first try, and the case back popped open with a soft click. Silas held the open watch under the light above the counter. He was quiet for a long time. Nate watched him and didn't say anything, which was unusual for Nate. Later he would think about why he stayed quiet, and the best answer he could come up with was that there was something about the way the old man looked at the movement that made interruption feel inappropriate, like walking into a church while someone was praying and deciding to wait. "Your pallet fork is fine," Silas said. "Sir, the escapement is dirty. There's a difference." Silas set the watch on the counter and looked at Nate directly. "When did you last service a Waltham 1908? Nate didn't answer immediately. "Honestly," he said finally, "preferably. I've serviced 2. Both were in better condition than this one. The second one I had to send out because I couldn't source the click spring." Silas nodded. He wasn't surprised. He also wasn't being unkind about it. There was something in his manner that was careful in a specific way. Not the carefulness of someone who is afraid of conflict, but the carefulness of someone who has seen what happens when words are thrown around without precision. "The mainspring is gone," he agreed. "But the rest of it, the wheel train, the jewels, the pallet fork, it's dirty and it's dry, but it's not worn out." These movements were made to last 150 years if they're maintained. He paused. They haven't been, but that's not the same as beyond repair. Nate looked at the watch on his counter. He looked at the old man standing on the other side of it. Where did you serve? He asked. He didn't know exactly why he asked it. Something about the hands. Something about the way he stood. Silas looked up. Who said I served? Nobody. I'm sorry, Korea, Silas said. 7th Infantry Division. I was 19 years old when they put me on a ship in San Francisco. He looked back down at the watch. My father gave me this before I shipped out. He said a man who can read the time always knows where he stands. Nate waited. He worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad for 31 years, Silas continued. Started as a track labourer when he was 16. By the time he retired, he was a division roadmaster. He carried that watch every single day he worked, never once missed a shift. He touched the edge of the case with one finger. When he gave it to me before I left, he didn't make a speech about it. He just put it in my hand and said, "Bring it back." Did he mean he meant both of us? Silas said. Bring us both back. He was quiet for a moment. I brought the watch back. He died while I was over there. November of 1951. My mother wrote me a letter. I didn't get it for 3 weeks. Nate Holloway had been in the watch repair business for 9 years. He had heard a lot of stories about a lot of watches. People brought their grandfather's Elgin and their grandmother's Bulova, and they said sentimental things about them in the way people practice saying sentimental things. This was different. This was a man who was not performing sentiment. He was just telling the truth, the way you tell the truth when you've been carrying it long enough that it doesn't feel like an emotional statement anymore, just a fact. Sit down, Nate said. Please. Can I get you some water? Coffee? I'm fine. But Silas sat on the stool. Nate kept on the customer side of the counter, which was usually for people waiting for adjustments on watch bands. He sat like a man who was used to being on his feet and sat down only when he'd decided it was appropriate. How old are you, Mr. Odum, if you don't mind me asking? 91 in March. Nate did the math without meaning to. 91. Born 1935 or thereabouts. 19 when he went to Korea, which meant he had been carrying the memory of that letter and that watch for over 70 years. Tell me about the mainspring, Silas said. Can you fabricate one? Fabricate? Nate stopped. You mean machine one from scratch? I mean whatever method gets it done. Back when I was a young man, before the Swiss parts supply dried up, the watchmakers in this trade made things. They didn't just replace things, they made them. He paused. I know the industry's changed. I know most shops just swap movements now. But I'm asking what you specifically can do. Nate felt something uncomfortable, not offense, something closer to recognition, the recognition of being seen clearly by someone who isn't being cruel about what they see. I have a lathe, he said. I haven't used it for fabrication in probably 2 years. Mostly I use it for refinishing, but you know how, in theory, a mainspring is. He stopped again. It's not simple. The alloy, the thickness, the set angle. If I get it wrong, it'll either break during winding or it won't deliver enough torque to run the movement. What would it take to get it right? Research, Nate said, and he said it honestly. I'd need to find the original specifications. Waltham published service manuals. Some of them are archived online, some at the NAWCC library, and I'd need the right material. Blue steel mainspring stock, the grade matters. He paused. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm saying it's going to take time, and I can't guarantee it. Silas looked at him steadily. Most things worth doing can't be guaranteed, he said. They can only be attempted correctly. Nate picked up the watch. He looked at the movement under the light again. The wheels were dark, with old oil that had dried to a varnish over the decades. The pallet fork did look intact, now that he was looking with different eyes. The escape wheel teeth, worn but not broken. The jewels were cloudy with grime, not cracked. He had looked at this watch for 60 seconds and said beyond repair. He thought about that. I need a week, he said, minimum, maybe 2. And I want to be up front. If I can't source the right mainspring stock, I may have to tell you I've hit a wall. I won't charge you for time I spend getting nowhere. I'm not worried about the money, Silas said. I know, that's not why I said it. Nate set the watch down carefully. I said it because I want to do this right, not just to do it. For the first time, something shifted in Silas Bertram Odum's expression. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something more like acknowledgement. The look a man gives when he hears a younger person say something that gives him a reason to keep paying attention. That's a reasonable thing to want, Silas said. He stood from the stool with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body required consultation before major maneuvers, but who had made peace with that negotiation. He buttoned the top button of his jacket, a wool herringbone, not new, but well maintained, and nodded once. "I'll leave it with you then. Can I get a number to reach you?" Silas gave him a phone number, a landline, Nate noticed. He wrote it down on a paper receipt, the old-fashioned kind on a pad, because there was something that made him not want to type this particular number into his phone like it was an entry in a database. "One more thing," Silas said, pausing at the door. "My father's initials are engraved inside the caseback. PAO, Prescott Aldous Odum. He put them there himself with a steel engraver, 1932, before the watch was even his. He bought it used and made it his own." He looked at Nate. "I want them to be legible when you're done." "I'll make sure of it," Nate said. Silas nodded and walked out into the grey November afternoon. Nate stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed. Then he looked down at the open watch in its case and picked up his loupe again. He spent the first 2 hours that evening just cleaning. Not repairing, cleaning. He dissolved the old oil with cleaning solution, worked gently with pegwood sticks and a brush fine enough that the hairs were almost invisible. As the grime came away from the wheels and the jewels, what he found underneath was extraordinary. The original finish on the plates was still visible, the fine stripes of machine-drawn lines that Waltham had used as a mark of quality in that era. The escape wheel had a lightness to it when he nudged it that told him it wasn't worn to the point of dysfunction. It was simply starved. Starved of lubrication, of attention, of anyone who had believed it was still worth the trouble. He stayed until 11 that night. He came back the next morning at 7 and ordered mainspring stock from a specialty supplier in Pennsylvania before he even made coffee. The specifications took him 4 hours to track down. He found the original Waltham technical manual in a scanned archive maintained by a horological society in Ohio, uploaded by a volunteer who had died in 2019 and whose name was listed on the society's website as a memorial entry. The manual specified a mainspring of blue-tempered carbon steel, 0.10 mm thick, 13 mm wide, with a set radius that had to be within a precise tolerance or the power delivery would be uneven. He read that section 3 times. The stock arrived 4 days later. He spent an afternoon at the lathe forming the spring, ruining 2 attempts before the third came out within tolerance. He hardened it in oil, tempered it carefully, coiled it in the barrel. Then he installed it. He wound the watch 11 turns, the amount specified in the manual, for initial power reserve assessment. He listened. The movement began to tick. It wasn't just a sound. It was a particular sound. The steady, unhurried rhythm of a lever escapement built when watchmakers still thought of what they were making as permanent objects, things designed to outlast the men who made them. Nate stood in his workroom at 8:15 in the evening with his loupe in his hand and listened to that sound for a long time. He called the landline. It rang 5 times. He was about to hang up when someone answered. "Odum, Mr. Odum. This is Nate Holloway, from the watch shop." A pause. "I know who you are, son. I wanted to let you know." Nate stopped. He tried to think of the professional way to say it, and then decided that the professional way was exactly wrong. "It's running," he said. "I wound it and set it on the time grapher, and it's running within 4 seconds a day." That's, he paused. "For a movement this age that hasn't been serviced in 40 years, that's better than I expected. A lot better." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Nate had expected some kind of response. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. What he heard instead was something harder to describe. Silence has different qualities depending on what's in it. This one was full. 4 seconds a day, Silas said finally. "Yes, sir." Another pause. "My father would have said that's close enough." Nate smiled. He was alone in his workroom, but he smiled anyway. "It's clean," he said. "The movement is clean and dry and lubricated correctly. I polished the crystal. I couldn't remove the crack, but I was able to reduce it significantly. And the initials inside the caseback are clear. I used a magnifier to check every stroke. P.O. Yes, sir." A very long silence. "When can I come get it?" "Whenever you'd like. I'm here Tuesday through Saturday 9 to 5. Or I can stay late if that's easier." "I'll come Thursday," Silas said. "In the morning. I'll have it ready." "Holloway." "Sir?" "You said you couldn't guarantee it." "I know, I've been thinking about that." A pause. "There's a difference between men who say they can't guarantee something because they don't want to be held responsible, and men who say it because they understand the nature of difficulty. You were in the second category." Another pause. I could tell. Nate didn't say anything immediately. I appreciate that, Mr. Odum. Get some sleep, Silas said. It's late. He hung up. Nate put the phone down and looked at the watch on his workbench. It was sitting in a small holder he used for timing checks, face up, hands moving in the steady sweep that a properly serviced lever movement makes. Not the click of a quartz, but a flow, an almost living continuity. He looked at it for a long time. Thursday morning, Silas Bertram Odum came in at 9:15, which was 15 minutes after Nate unlocked the door. He was wearing the same herringbone jacket. He sat on the stool again. Nate set the watch on the counter in its case. He'd polished the case exterior as well, not to disguise the wear. The wear was part of it, the record of where the watch had been, but to bring back the gold fill's original luster where it was still present. The crack in the crystal was faint now, barely a line. The hands pointed correctly. The movement was quiet but present. A beat you couldn't quite hear unless the room was still, but could feel if you held it. Silas picked it up. He didn't open it. He didn't examine the movement or check the crystal or hold it under the light. He just held it in his palm with his fingers closed around it, the way you hold something you've been waiting to hold for a long time. Nate didn't say anything. He had learned that much in 2 weeks. Silas held it for about a minute. Then he opened his hand and looked at it again. "How much do I owe you?" Nate told him. It was substantially below his usual rate. He had thought about this. He had the right to charge what the work cost him, and the work had cost him considerable time and material. But he had also received something from this job that didn't appear in any invoice. A reason to use his lathe again, a lesson in looking more carefully before making a decision, and the particular satisfaction of being wrong about something and discovering that the correction made him better at his work. He had priced accordingly. Silas didn't argue. He paid with a check written in the careful, deliberate script of a man who had written 10,000 checks over 90 years and still took each one seriously. He capped his pen, put it in his breast pocket. Then he looked at Nate. "I'm going to ask you something, and you can say no. All right, I have 7 more watches at home. Not all of them mine. Some of them my wife's, some of my father's, some came from men in my unit who didn't make it back." He said this without inflection, just the fact. None of them running. I've been looking for someone to work on them for about 15 years. Most shops I've been to either can't do it or aren't interested. He paused. "Are you interested?" Nate Holloway looked at the old man. He looked at the watch now closed in Silas's palm. He thought about the scanned manual, the mainspring stock, the 4 hours of research, the 2 failed attempts at the lathe. He thought about listening to the movement start. "Yes," he said, "I'm interested." "Good." Silas stood from the stool. The careful negotiation with gravity again, the precise economy of a man who had learned to spend his physical reserves with intention. "I'll bring them in next week, 3 at a time. I don't like to transport more than 3 at once." "That's fine, any day." "Tuesday," Silas said. "I'll come Tuesday." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "My father bought that watch in 1932 for $11, he said without turning around. He was making 17 cents an hour at the time. He saved for 8 months. A pause. He knew how to be patient when something was worth waiting for. He walked out. Nate stood at the counter. Through the window he could see Silas moving along Dunmore Street at the measured pace of a man going somewhere he intended to arrive at, a pace that had nothing to do with hurry and everything to do with purpose. He looked at the stool on the customer side of the counter. He thought about what it meant that a 91-year-old man had carried a broken watch into his shop, not because he expected a miracle, but because he had found, after 15 years of looking, someone who said the right thing in the right way. He went back to his workbench. He opened his order catalogue. He put in a larger order for blue steel mainspring stock, several gauges, enough to be prepared. He also made a note to himself, not on his phone, but on a paper notepad he kept by the bench for measurements, to find the Waltham Technical Archive again and download every manual they had before that Ohio Horological Society's website went dark one day the way volunteer archives always eventually did. He didn't want to lose access to that knowledge. He had the feeling he was going to need it. The following Tuesday, Silas Bertram Odum walked through the door of Holloway Precision at 9:15, again 15 minutes past opening. He set a wooden case on the counter, smaller than the first one, fitted for 3 watches. He unlatched it and stepped back. Nate came around from behind his workbench, put on his loupe, and looked. 2 pocket watches and 1 small pendant watch, its case engraved with a design that was too worn to identify with certainty, but might have been a wreath. All 3 lay still, as dead to outward appearances as the Waltham had been 6 weeks ago. But Nate Holloway did not say beyond repair. He did not say financially speaking. He did not estimate from the outside how much was left on the inside. He picked up the first watch. With 2 careful fingers he found the groove with the case knife on the first try, which he would not have been able to say 6 weeks ago. He opened the case back and held the movement under the light. He looked for a long time. "Tell me about this one," he said. Silas settled onto the stool. He took his time. He always took his time. "That one," he said, "belonged to a man named Jerome." He paused. "Corporal Jerome Albright. He was from a small town in Tennessee, didn't say much, could fix anything that had ever been made by human hands. He gave me that watch to hold before we went up a particular hill in the winter of 1950. He said, 'Hold on to this, I move faster without it.'" A long pause. He was right. He did move faster, but he didn't come back down. Nate looked at the movement in his hand. He looked at Silas. "His family?" he said. "He had a sister. She passed some years ago. Her children are still alive somewhere in East Tennessee. I've been meaning to track them down." Silas looked at the watch. It seemed like the right thing to do would be to give it to them working, not broken. Nate set the watch down carefully on the felt-lined tray he used for incoming work. He reached for the second one. "This is what it means to take care of something," he thought. "Not the sentimentality people perform when they want to seem like they care. The real version. The version that doesn't announce itself. The version that waits 15 years if it has to. That brings 3 at a time, because you don't want to transport more than 3 at once. That pays a fair price to a younger man who said the right thing by accident and then had to figure out how to be worth it." He opened the second case. He found the groove on the first try.